It's great to be with you guys. If you don't know who I am, I'm Michael Shattuck. I'm an elder here at COA, although I'm not around very often, unfortunately. But maybe fortunately, because you get to hear Tim, and I don't know, maybe unfortunately, I don't know. But I don't get to be around very much with you guys because I'm also planting a church down 141 in Baldwin, and so it's always a pleasure to come and be with my family here. And I'm going to continue in this series that you guys have been rolling through of Proverbs. It's really interesting. Anytime you watch the news, any of you guys like to watch the news? Nope, not a single person in here likes to watch the news. That's ridiculous. Come on, ostriches burying your head in the sand. So listen, I like to watch the news. I wake up, I've got a routine in the morning. It involves coffee and Fox and Friends. You can roll halfway with me in that. It's been this way a very long time. I've never been, whatever, right? I've never been the sports guy. I was always the band guy, and I like to play. Thank you. I see that hand in the back. Yeah. So I was never the ESPN guy. I've always been the news guy, just trying to figure out what's going on in the world, and honestly kind of coming at it from the perspective of what blew up last night, or where should I not go today unless I'm packing, or like what part of town is the fire happening in, and not like I want to see that, but there's just something in me that just wants to know what's going on, except right now. Because no matter what you're watching something about the election, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that because I'll lose everybody out the door, just like I end up changing the channel. So this is what I do. I get into my routine. I'm kind of waking up. I've got my coffee. This is like getting ready for work and all of that, and I got the news on, and what do? Like, first thing they do is go to election coverage, and I'm like off to the networks. I'm like off on 2, 4, and 5. Actually, it's 4, 2, then 5. 5's a little too professional for me, but whatever. And so I'm skipping around looking for anything but election coverage. And at the same time, a few weeks ago, Tim's like, hey, I think you should preach Proverbs 8. And Proverbs is all about wisdom, and so I've got all this stuff rattling around inside my mind as I'm watching this crazy roll out in front of me about what's happening in our nation right now with all of the election stuff. And I'm like, how perfect that we be talking about wisdom when it just is something that you can't find even in presentations where all of the good, all of what's happening in the world around us should be almost like spoon-fed to us in the news, like, check out this thing that's happening. And you're just like, what are they thinking? And the memes abound on Facebook, and everyone's kind of talking about this stuff too, and I think we're all in agreement, like, where's the wisdom? Like, where in the way that we're addressing one another is the wisdom? Where in the way that people are answering questions is the wisdom? We're just trying to figure out what your policies are, and you're talking about the other person, and that's both of them. So you don't even know who I'm for. You probably can guess, maybe. But where is the wisdom when they're even like talking about who they are? And so we as followers of Jesus, we start to look at all of this, and we're trying to figure out, like, how are we supposed to think? How are we supposed to kind of look at everything that's going on around us? How are we supposed to respond to everything going on around us? And I don't know how many of you are working, living, eating, whatever, around people that talk about this stuff a lot, but where I work, there's people all around me that are constantly kind of having conversations about life, and specifically right now about the election. And I just sit and I think, man, like, really? That's the road you're going to go down? Like, that's what you're going to pick to be your thing, and that's this? And I'm just like, where's the wisdom? And it makes me kind of wonder, do we even know what that word means? Like, if we were to just talk about what is wisdom, I think that followers of Jesus, especially, I would hope that we would talk about the mind of God, that we would talk about his direction for us. A lot of times when you hear people that are trying to figure out where they're supposed to go in life, I've got a son that is a junior in college. He's trying to figure out, where do I go from here? And when I graduate, what am I going to be? What am I going to do? Am I going to be able to make money? And he's like, pray for wisdom for me. We've got folks that we minister to at Kaleo that are going through struggles, and oftentimes they'll say, pray for wisdom for me. But how often do we hear that word in the world around us? How often do we hear that word in other contexts besides here? Not very often, right? Would you say? Not very often. Sometimes I hear it where there's a young guy or girl who just seems to be making good decisions, and someone will say this phrase that they're wise beyond their years, which is interesting. But outside of this context, I really don't hear that word used very much. And so you guys have already been going through, at least 7 chapters of Proverbs and have been sort of marinating in this idea of wisdom. And so we get to continue on tonight. If you weren't here last week, Proverbs 7 is this great passage that's kind of sultry, and it's almost like PG-14, and there's this idea that there is wisdom out there, and it's saying come this way, and yet there's another force at work, folly or foolishness, that's saying, no, what you want is over here. And that speaks so well to our hearts. Like, we are so attuned to folly. We're so attuned to foolishness. We're so attuned to the thing that's saying life is over here. We're like, oh, shiny things. And we're like off trying to get it. That's just who we are. And it goes all the way back to Genesis, where, we find ourselves doing something that just seems absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. Everything is perfect. The Creator, our Lord God, has made everything to be good, right, and perfect. And we have everything we could have ever dreamed of having, including relationship with each other. Just imagine, perfect. Nothing but goodness. And yet it wasn't enough. And folly, foolishness, temptation steps in. Satan himself says, really what you need is this thing. And he brings us to the shiny thing. And he says, this is what is going to really bring you life. Like, you think you have it good, but you're missing out on something. And what they had walked away from is the heart of the Father who loved them and who was leading them and shepherding them and giving them everything they could need. And I think even it's just this beautiful picture, and they had this element of disbelief where they're like, I don't know that he really is that good, that he's kind of holding back on me. Any of you Lord of the Ring fans, like, I just have Gollum in my head, like, ugh, get away! Like, he's holding out on me. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to eat from the tree because I just don't believe that he was that good. And we all of a sudden then realize that he was that good, and that in our rebellion everything has changed, because the way we see the world is instantly changed, and even the way we see ourselves is instantly changed, because they go nutso in the garden and grab the tiniest dumb little leaves and try to cover, and then they run into the forest thinking that the Lord God, creator of everything, isn't going to be able to find them. They go crazy in that moment. They turn on each other. Yeah, they listen to folly. But isn't that what we do? Like, there's something out there that we feel like is just being held back from us, and we need that in order to have true life. Yeah, there's no wisdom in that whenever it's not related to the Father, when it's not related to what he is leading us toward. And so I was doing some thinking, and as we roll into chapter 8 here, I just wonder if there's something about identifying wisdom, if it's in line with the heart and the mission of God. His direction that's given to us, that's going to be redemptive in life, both in our lives and in our relationships and in the world around us, and restorative, moving us toward restoration personally, in relationships, in our workplace. in our families, wherever we might be. I wonder if that's the way that we could look at wisdom. Sometimes I've heard it defined as experience, knowledge plus experience. I think that's kind of lacking. Knowledge plus experience, you know? I don't know that that's it. I think that what we're seeing roll out here is when our lives move, because God doesn't intend for us to sit still. Like, we can only do this so long before he's like, you got a problem. Like, if the only thing you do is absorb, you have become a sponge. You're no longer a follower. Like, it's time to wring that thing out and let's get to moving, right? And so there is definitely this element of movement, of action. You see it playing out in 7. We're going to see it playing out in 8. This movement that's in line with the heart of God. Right? So let's just dive in. If you got your Bible, I hope you do, grab it and let's start reading in Proverbs 8. So, does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand, beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals she cries aloud. To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the children of man. O simple ones, learn prudence. O fools, learn sense. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They're all straight to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. The first thing that I see going on here in this poem is in this first section or strophe. I'm not a poet. I don't really even know what that means. And so I'm going to roll with section. If you get literature, then it's a strophe. So there you go. In section 1, in these first 11 verses, the thing that I see going on here is that wisdom is pursuing. Did you see that? She's making herself available for everyone. She's calling out. She's raising her voice. She's on the heights. She's going to the highest places and calling out. Why would she do that? Well, it's because we need something to get our attention. Because we are just kind of wanderers, aimlessly, like a bunch of lemmings, kind of going through life, and we've constantly got to be woken up because we live at times, if we're not careful, in a stupor, and so she calls to us. She makes herself available, which makes me think about all of the times that we're like, just pray for wisdom. Like, I just don't have it. Like, please bring it to me. Like, God, I'm just going to sit and I'm going to wait for your wisdom instead of, Lord, like, are you speaking right now? Because what he's saying is that wisdom is already taking her place around all of us and calling out. So wisdom is pursuing us. And so if here tonight you're saying, I'm praying for wisdom, then know that you're not the one seeking wisdom. Wisdom is seeking you. Like, I think that's pretty exceptional, don't you? You don't have to sit and wonder. The Father's for you. And he's sending his wisdom to you. Her promise is one, did you catch this, of nobility. I don't know about you, but I'm into that. Nobility, truth, and righteousness. There are many, many times in our lives, maybe most of the time, that we try to define those things for ourselves. What do we define nobility based on? Right now it'd be William and Kate. Right? If you don't know who they are, don't worry about it. Don't even look them up, because it's okay. But for those of you who are like, oh, I love those guys, like, that's what we define nobility based on. This is royalty from the UK. There, I spoiled it. This is royalty from the UK, that they're, in front of everyone. Everyone's trying to figure out what's she wearing. They're wearing those dumb little hats, and I don't know, what are they called? Someone here knows. What? Fascinators. Of course they are. Fascinators, right? You know what I'm talking about? Those weird little boxes that they sit on top of their heads. Like, what's she wearing? What are they doing? What did they name their kids? And people will start falling after that. Truth is something that we absolutely try to define for ourselves. And we even fall into holes in conversations where people are like, man, that's not truth. Like, that's just what you believe, but my truth is my own truth. But what wisdom is saying here is that as she is crying out, she's offering us the opportunity for growth. She's offering us the opportunity to come to a place of understanding. In 6, she speaks of noble things. We are oftentimes in the dirt, wallowing around like a bunch of ridiculous pigs, finding nothing else to talk about but senseless, ridiculous things. Okay? Right? Are you with me with it? Or are you thinking, step off? Don't talk to me about my conversations all day Monday morning about The Walking Dead and about how gory it was, and yet I kept watching it. I won't say anything else. I didn't see it. But I heard, like, that was what the entire conversation all day Monday was about. Like, but what about noble things? What about righteousness? What inhabits our words? What inhabits the thoughts of our lives that we truly are fixated on? Is it the noble things that are from above, that are from our Father, that are from this star-breathing creator God who has come after us and is living among us in the form of his Spirit? Is it about what he's doing in our lives? Is it about sacred space? Is it about the things that he's doing to change a community? In my life, it's probably more often than not the case. It's trivialities. It's not noble things that I see a prince and a princess living to talk about. But this is what wisdom brings us. It elevates us as she pursues us. Not that our value over the rest of creation changes, but that the content of our life is transformed. She's pursuing us to have that way in us. We need to let go of defining these things for ourselves, righteousness for ourselves, that I am right. I take a stand for my own values against everyone else, and I have to be right. When that stands against what wisdom or the way of the Lord is, you are not right. You are not living in the righteous way that she has for you. Finally, the writer, Solomon, says, she should be pursued beyond riches and success. How about that? She should be pursued. And think about the way that if any of you are investors or know anything about anything, look at what he says in 10. Take my instruction instead of what? Really, take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. This is the 24 karat stuff. Not the stuff that I could afford. Think about that. Nothing else compares with her. How often do we pursue some idea of success, some idea of wealth, some idea of riches, and it's completely contrary to what God truly has for us? Think about what we're giving up in those moments, in those seasons. Let's move on. 12 through 21 is the second strophe or section. 12 says, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance and the way of evil, and perverted speech I hate. I have counsel and sound wisdom. I have insight. I have strength. By me kings reign and rulers decree what is just. By me princes rule and nobles, all who govern justly. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me. Riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and righteousness. My fruit is better than, it must be important because he says it again, my fruit is better than gold, even fine gold, and my yield than choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness in the paths of justice, granting an inheritance to those who love me, and filling their treasury what I read here is that wisdom satisfies everything that you're thinking about in this section about how rulers rule, about how nobles govern, about the riches of silver and fine gold, the fruit that comes from one's life and one's action. We can look for satisfaction in all different kinds of places. But what we're reading here is that the one who finds wisdom walks in the way of knowledge, counsel, and right judgment, and is blessed in return for doing so much. And we, I think, are sometimes, and we should be careful, but we're super careful when we read things like granting an inheritance to those who love me and filling their treasuries, because we never want to be misconstrued as the talking heads on a lot of so-called Christian TV that say all you got to do is have little faith and your bank account's going to blow up. But what just happened there? The writer said, what I've got for you is way better than any kind of money you could ever come up with. And yet I'm still going to fill your treasuries. To me, that must mean that there's something far better than the way I measure my bank account. That I have a treasury that needs something far greater. I'd like some fine gold. Like, trust me, I'd like some fine gold. I'd like some choice silver. But what he's saying here is that there is something beyond that of value that we should be pursuing. And isn't it amazing that we're promised here that we will find wisdom as we look for it? There's no way around it, because she is positioning herself at all of these prominent places in our lives. And so it's not a question, are we ever going to come around her? The question is, are we sitting there just doing nothing but like, oh man, I wish I was wise, and she's over there calling, and we're just like, man, I wish I was wise. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. No, he's like, all you got to do, man, is just stand up and just take a step. Stop sitting there. Stop just thinking about it. Stop just asking people to pray about it, and get up and pursue me and understand that I'm going to be there. Understand that I'm going to be right there. I'm going to speak into you. I'm going to speak into you the way that I speak into rulers. Isn't that amazing that we are not second, third, fourth, 17th class citizens? That the same wisdom that God says he places in rulers to rule is available to us. I mean, there's something about us if that's the case. There must be something special about us. I find a lot of peace in that. That I don't have to prove my worth in order to receive God's wisdom, in order for her to pursue me. And I think we need to recognize that when man walks in God's wisdom, God brings his version of success. We've got to be ready for that. Because there are times where wisdom and walking in the way of God, walking in his redemptive ways, walking in a way that looks for restoration, that it's going to hurt. Me and some of the guys at Kaleo have recently been talking about, this is a weird one, Jesse James, the motorcycle builder. Anybody? Yeah, raise your hand so I can know who I'm talking to. All right, we got about 30-40%. Yeah, so this is a real crazy dude, ended up marrying Sandra Bullock. I don't know why I know this stuff, but I do. And I don't pursue it. I really don't. But sometimes it just gets in there. I don't even know how it happens. But he had this show that he made these choppers, and they were legit choppers. Like Shaquille O'Neal, he rode one of Jesse's bikes. Like, it's those kind of guys who are ordering these bikes. He made Orange County choppers kind of look like grade schoolers with their designs. And so Jesse had this machine that he would work with his foot, and somebody looked it up recently and told me the name, and it was really long, and I'm like, I'm not going to remember it, so I'm just going to keep calling it the Pounder. That's not the name of it, so sorry. But it's just nothing but this hydraulic hammer that pounds. Like, that's all it does. And he would do something with his foot and turn up the pressure, and then every now and then he'd lighten the pressure. And what was happening is he would take this sheet of metal, this big piece of sheet metal, and he'd stick it in his pounder and he'd start working it. It's a flat piece of metal. I'm like, what's he going to do with that? And he takes it into this machine, and little by little it's just pounding, it starts forming, and little by little he's lightening the pressure when he's making these perfect contours. And what comes out from this once was sheet metal is this beautiful gas tank that you're like, how is it possible? Listen, there are times when the Lord is leading us in a way that is just going to feel like we're being pounded. Okay, we've got brothers and sisters in places around the world. I don't know if you've read recently about what's going on in Aleppo, or if you know what Aleppo is. Like, hopefully you're there, better than one of the candidates, but that's another nonsense thing. But, I mean, there are Christians being crucified there right now. There were men and boys who were tortured and hung on crosses. There were aid workers that said, we're not leaving because God has called us. Now, they would tell you that this is it. I didn't read this. I don't want to put words into this. But in his wisdom, God said stay. Now, there's nothing humanly wise about that. Because someone comes in that door back there with a cross, we're probably out that side, right? Probably. Or there's going to be some dudes that rush that guy. We're going to fight. They submitted to what the Spirit was leading them to do. And these men and their sons died after hanging 2 days on a cross. Their wives were beheaded and hung on crosses as well, to a warning to all the other Christians. Pretty tough to talk about our suffering when those kinds of things are happening to our brothers and sisters. But nonetheless, we face the pounder, right? We face life and the context that we live in and just difficult things that happen. And there's this call to wisdom, and there are times where we look at wisdom and we're like, we know what the consequences of that are. I'm out. And so what we need to see here and be aligned on as family, because as we're going through this, we should be living this together. So when that pressure, that pounding comes, you're not bearing that by yourself. We're doing that together, locking arms. But we're trusting all the while that his version of success, his version of riches is what he's trying to work out in your life. And he promises that he'll be faithful and that wisdom, will come through. And we see that God's version of success is far greater than any riches that we can come up with. Third section starts in verse 22. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, at the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there was no springs abounding with water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above. When he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. I think here we see that wisdom both creates and delights. Everything, as we say in the story of God, everything was good, right, and perfect in creation, including man and woman. Everything. And so when you think about how God looked at creation, can you imagine the delight to be able to say, and we read it from him, and everything was good, and it was good. And then he creates man and woman, and it was very good. And so we read this really intriguing idea that wisdom was there. I think it's the message that says, as a master architect, intimately involved in creation. Everything was created exactly as intended. I was thinking about that, and I don't know how often each day I say the word oops. I don't know about you. Oops was not in the vocabulary before the fall, before we rebelled. And you think about that kind of intentionality. I don't live with that. Like, I wish I could. Like, I would be intentional to set something up and then it falls apart. Like, I'm intentional to build things that I'm pretty sure are going to fall apart the first time they're used. And so I just don't build things. That's the way my intentionality goes. But at this point, everything was good, right, and perfect, and it was created exactly as it was intended. And you start to think about wisdom being intimately connected with every part of creation. But that also must mean that wisdom, if it was created, if it was there in creation, was also fractured with the fall. God delighted in his creation, especially man and woman. You see wisdom delighting in the inhabited world that God had made. But we know that there's a change that happens there. We know that that delight changes. We know that the peace that we had with God changes after our rebellion. The rebellion occurs. We decide to shake a fist at God and say, we're better gods than you are. Death enters the world. Shame enters the world. Yes, right consequences. Yes, just consequences for us to experience that separation, but so painful. And we find ourselves still today living with those consequences. From backaches when we wake up to rebellion of children and people being crucified, wars. At every level, we find that we're all in some way continuing to rebel, choosing our own way and ignoring the call of wisdom, ignoring the call that stands on the heights, ignoring the call that says, come over here, and instead we pursue folly that we saw last time in chapter 7. And we go the way that's easy and that's going to feel good, and it's going to, as we say, it's going to scratch an itch. And we find this feeling in our lives of no satisfaction, no contentment. Sometimes it just feels like chaos. And all of that can lead to bitterness. It can lead to despair. It can lead to us just checking out. Some of you guys might be there tonight, as a matter of fact. Just like ready to check out. I just feel on my own. I don't feel like anyone's with me in what I'm going through. And I'm here tonight because someone invited me. I'm here tonight because I feel like I had to. If that's you, just think for a moment that the Father looks at you in this incredibly special way, that he's placed something that's readily available so that you once again can experience his delight, so that you can experience life the way he wanted for you when we're reading here that wisdom delighted. We'll get to that in a second. Finally, in verse 32, we enter the final section of this poem. And now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. I think this is our cue that wisdom is there trying to restore. The call is one to life. The call is one to being blessed. The call is one, as we've seen even previously in this passage, the call is one to fruitfulness. The call is one to a different kind of riches. Listen, and some of it might be monetary, because that's from him too. And we continue to live with our hands open, knowing that he's the one that's placed it there. But ultimately, he wants abundance for us in his fruitfulness, knowing that he's giving us the knowledge that we need to take the next step. And this is another thing that we fall into. Listen, there's either death or there's life. Sometimes people are like, I don't know where I'm at. Like, I'm somewhere in between there. I'm not really feeling this or that. Listen, there's either death or there's life. And when wisdom says that she's come to restore life, when wisdom says that those who find her find life, what's the alternative? There's only one. And I don't know about you, but I kind of prefer life. And there are days that I feel like, even now, like there are days where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like the minutia is just like numbing. Where's life? And the Spirit in those moments is like, you're not listening to me. And I think that's where she brings us. For those who find me. And how does she describe that? As one sort of watching daily and waiting beside my doors. I have 3 dogs. One's not doing great right now, but he still is watching for me. And when you think about dogs especially, like, I don't know, like, we're having some hard times with the dogs, and so just run with the metaphor with me. He's on my mind. Like that thing when you come home and it's like, you're finally here. I was waiting for you all day long, Like, don't you see that that's what is being described here? Those that are just waiting. Think about that song that we sang. Like, we just want so desperately to experience the fullness of the Spirit and that readiness that we have when we're singing and we're pouring our hearts out to God. He's saying, live with that expectancy. Live at my gates. Live at my door. Live listening for me, waiting for me. And instead of us just kind of punching the card when we come into a church event or when we open the scriptures at home and we read and we spend time in prayer and then we clock out and we go and do this other thing. Like, what he's saying is, wait for me in everything that you're doing. Like, find ways while you're in what you sometimes feel like is drudgery. Find ways to listen to what is my wisdom to speak to you in this moment so that you can be an ambassador of restoration and redemption in this place that so often you downplay is nothing more than a paycheck. No, it's just a paycheck. No, it's not. Listen, I'm talking to myself here. I'm going to preach to myself a little bit here. What he's saying is, if we wait at his gate, if we listen to what the Spirit's saying, there is far more for us than a paycheck. There's riches to be had as we follow. There's riches to be had if we give our lives to what wisdom is trying to accomplish in us. And there's a promise there in 35 that for those who find, honestly, I don't like the translation. Other ways of thinking, because in other places in the same chapter where it uses the word find, it's actually a different Hebrew word. That's just important because I like some of these other words that you could use there. Those who possess, those who attain. I like this one. Those who discover wisdom, because it's as if we're waiting and then the door opens because we know it's going to, because we're being pursued by wisdom, and then we discover it, and life is what is given to us in return. But there's a different promise in verse 36, that restoration, life will not come for those who fail to discover, for those who fail to wait at the door, wait at the gate. Life won't come. The Message says, but if you wrong me, you damage your very soul. When you reject me, you're flirting with death. If we could just get that into our minds, that it's not just my time, it's not just like I get to have some free time apart from God because he doesn't want the best for me when I'm working and hanging with my friends and doing all that. Like, if we can get past that and see that he wants life for us, then I think a lot would change in the way that we live. I think we might party more, right? I think that we might just like feel freedom and feel celebration instead of constantly being oppressed and just sinking like I can't take this place anymore. He says, I want to give you life in this place. Let's roll. What is this wisdom? Guys, when you start to put the story of God together and you start to recognize what's really going on here, like it's the most fascinating thing. That all of these places that we're reading about wisdom and we're reading about pursuing, listen, that's prophetic of Jesus. That's prophetic of Jesus. How do we know that? Jesus pursues. Jesus, the ultimate missionary, comes as fully God and becomes fully man and puts this on. Like, this is not the suit that I would want to put on if I was fully God. And that's not like self-deprecating. I wouldn't want to be in this. I'm ready to go home. Like, not right now. I'm not depressed. I'll take a hug. I don't need it. Like, I'm ready. Call us back to you. That you would call our hearts to be open, to allow you to accomplish in us what you desire for your glory and the good of our lives and the people that you've placed us around. Just praise you and thank you together as your bride, as your body, as your family.